the rise and the sacrifice of a lost childhood. The world knew him as the king of pop. An icon, a genius, a performer unlike any other. But behind the glitter and the sold-out stadiums lived a man who carried a deeper pain than most of us could ever imagine. The story of Michael Jackson isn't just about fame, it's the tragedy of a boy who never got to be a child and an adult who could never escape the weight of the world. Michael Joseph Jackson was born on August 29, 1958, in Gary, Indiana, a humble industrial city. Far from the glamour of Hollywood, he and his 9 siblings lived in a small house where music was one of the few sources of joy. However, the central figure in this story wasn't unconditional love, but the relentless ambition of his father, Joe Jackson. Joe, a former crane operator with dreams of becoming a musician, saw in his children not just talent, but a business opportunity. He formed the Jackson 5, and young Michael, at just 5 years old, was pushed into the role of lead singer. From that moment on, Michael's life was no longer his own. His childhood was sacrificed on the altar of fame. There was no time for bike rides, birthday parties without cameras, or sleepovers with friends. Instead, there were endless rehearsals and physical punishments. Joe Jackson was not a gentle manager, he was a strict disciplinarian who used physical and psychological violence to ensure perfection. Michael danced to survive and sang to stay safe, learning that affection and approval only came through success. Years later, he would describe his childhood as a lonely and painful experience, feeling more like a puppet than a child. The Jackson 5 achieved stardom under the Motown label, with hits like I Want You Back and ABC. Michael, with his charisma and powerful voice, captured the world's attention. He was the star, but the pressure was immense. He was the boy who had to be a man on stage and a son who lived in fear at home. With every show, every recording, he delved deeper into a world that was both his only refuge and his prison. He poured every part of himself into his music, desperately trying to connect with the world in a way he was denied in real life. The transition to a solo career was a turning point. The album Off the Wall, 1979, established him as an independent and innovative artist, but it was with Thriller, 1982, that he exploded into a stratosphere of fame no one had ever reached before. The album became a global phenomenon, breaking racial barriers on MTV and redefining the music industry with its cinematic music videos and revolutionary choreography. Michael became the most famous artist on the planet, but the price of this global fame was the total loss of his privacy. From then on, his life was no longer his. Every movement, every word, every change in his appearance was photographed, analyzed, and relentlessly criticized by the media. And when the world saw his face change, his skin lighten, and his voice soften, the reaction was cruel. They didn't ask why, but mocked him and labeled him Wacko Jacko. Headlines turned him into a joke. What they didn't know, or deliberately ignored, was the complexity of his situation. Michael suffered from vitiligo, a skin condition that causes the loss of pigmentation. His plastic surgeries were mostly desperate attempts to reconstruct a face he felt had been broken by the media, but also to gain a minimum of control over a life he couldn't control. He became obsessed with perfection, not because he thought he was handsome, but because he never felt he was good enough, not for his father, not for the media, and not for society. This quest for control and approval was the engine of his life, a quest that led him to build Neverland, his ranch that was both a playground and a fortress. It was a world where he could finally be the child he never had the chance to be. A place where innocence was valued and where laughter, for a brief moment, drowned out loneliness. However, the peace in Neverland didn't last long, and the paradise he created would ironically become the center of his greatest controversies. The fall, the accusations, and a torn legacy. The paradise that Michael Jackson built in Neverland was quickly dismantled. In 1993, the first accusations of child abuse emerged. It was the beginning of a media firestorm that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The story of a man obsessed with childhood, who shared his home with children from all over the world whom he invited himself, became the main theme of the tabloids. The headlines didn't wait for the truth, they printed guilt, and for the public, the damage was already done. Michael was forced to make an out-of-court settlement with one of the children's families, an act that many interpreted as an admission of guilt, but which he explained as a desperate attempt to avoid a prolonged and humiliating trial. The psychological trauma was so great that he was seen publicly medicating himself and revealed a growing dependence on painkillers. The 2000s brought a new wave of scrutiny and controversy. In 2003, a documentary by Martin Bashir, Living with Michael Jackson, showed him holding hands with Gavin Arvizo, a 13-year-old boy. The documentary was a public relations disaster, and the carefully edited report to cause controversy was the main reason Michael was again accused of child abuse. This time, he didn't settle. The story reached a new level of public hysteria, culminating in a criminal trial in 2005. The media circus that set up outside the courthouse was relentless. Michael Jackson was portrayed as a monster, and the headlines demanded blood. During the trial, he was subjected to humiliating and ruthless scrutiny. Television cameras showed his every step toward the courthouse, every expression on his face. The mental and emotional pressure was visible in his physical state. However, after a long and exhaustive process, he was acquitted of all 14 charges. Despite the acquittal, the damage to his reputation was irreparable. The world never let him forget. The stigma remained. The whispers continued. His soul, already heavy, became even more burdened. After the trial, he retreated from the spotlight, exhausted and financially devastated. The man who was once the king of pop, the most successful artist of all time, saw his career stall. The people he trusted betrayed him, and his inner circle shrank dramatically. Loneliness and pain pushed him further into a dependence on medication, including powerful painkillers and sedatives. He was on the edge of the abyss, seeking relief for a pain that music and fame could not heal. Still, the world wanted more. They demanded a comeback, begged for another tour, and said he owed it to them. But what did the world owe him? The chance for peace? The chance to heal the wounds of a lifetime of scrutiny? In 2009, Michael Jackson decided to give the world what it wanted, the This Is It tour. It was a last attempt to reclaim his place on stage, to remind the world who he was. But behind the curtains, his health was in a critical state. His body was exhausted, his heart tired, and his mind was barely holding on. The pressure was immense, the tour had already sold out, debts were piling up, and public expectations were astronomical. To endure the exhaustive rehearsal routine, he turned to even stronger medication. On June 25, 2009, the King of Pop collapsed from a propofol overdose administered by his private doctor. He didn't die in a blaze of glory on stage, but in silence, alone in a rented mansion. The cause of death was cardiac arrest, just weeks before his big return. The man who healed millions through his music, who made the world dance, died in a bed, surrounded by pills and monitors. The saddest part is that, even in death, the world didn't stop consuming him. His estate exploded in value. His music sold more than ever, and his name was back on the charts. But Michael wasn't there to see it. He wasn't there to feel the love or to finally hear the world say, "Thank you." He inspired generations, but he spent his entire life searching for the one thing that completely eluded him: unconditional love. The story of Michael Jackson is a cruel reminder that fame doesn't buy happiness or peace of mind. He was a man with a gift, but also with a deep wound that never healed. No matter how much he gave the world, he could never fill the emptiness inside. The crown he wore was heavy and, in the end, full of thorns. His life and death make us question the price we pay to elevate someone to a pedestal and what society owes those who, like Michael, give their all but are consumed by the very light they created.